Look, if you're watching this video, you're about to draft your fantasy team. So I don't want to waste another second of your time. These are the 10 best picks for 2023 fantasy football, and yes, you want to draft them. And let's start in Minnesota with the rookie Jordan Addison, who I want as much of this guy as I can get in round 8 of drafts. Now, Addison was taken with the 24th overall pick. There was like 4 wide receivers in a row who went. He was the last of this bunch to get taken, but he's probably going to see the best year 1 usage. Now, here's what you should know. He was great in college. As a freshman, he broke out at Pittsburgh with 60 catches over 600 yards, and then his second year popped off. 100 catches, nearly 1,600 yards with Kenny Pickett. And then he transferred to USC his final year, where he played with another great quarterback in Caleb Williams and averaged 8 targets per game. Now, Addison joins an offense where there's Justin Jefferson, so he clearly won't be the wide receiver 1, but that doesn't matter. Because check out how the Vikings have been passing more and more each year. You can see here in 2019, the more that this is downwards, the negative right here, this is a bad thing. But every year it's been trending towards more passing, and it's only going to continue the way they're built this year, drafting a first-round receiver, losing Dalvin Cook to keep passing. And last year, the Vikings wide receivers were number 1 and number 2 in total routes run. And the wide receiver who was number 2 in that metric was Adam Thielen with 621 routes run, and now he's gone. And Thielen last year wasn't even good. He wasn't able to take advantage of this, only seeing 107 targets. And more specifically, Thielen saw career worst years, and it makes sense because he was 32 years old, an aging receiver, just 88th in wide receiver efficiency, averaging just 1.15 yards per route run. Addison is going to be better than this. And even if Addison is just as good as Thielen was last year, which would be a major disappointment, well, he would finish as a top 40 wide receiver, which is where he's being drafted right now. He's being drafted at his floor. And we could say that he's going to be better than Thielen was last year, because check this out right here. Guys who average 2.45 yards per route run, which is elite since 2016 and had slot usage. These are the rookies that are in this class, but then look at the actual proven NFL veterans. A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Jefferson, Jacoby Myers, Elijah Moore, most of these guys. Wan'Dale Robinson coming off of injury. Kiki Kute had flashes at times with the Colts. Most of these guys have had success in the NFL. Now you may be saying, but Sal, what about T.J. Hockenson? He's still there and he was great last year. Well, T.J. Hockenson is one of the worst 4th round picks you can take right now, because you can't use last year's stat as any type of reliable metric, because now Jordan Addison's there, not Adam Thielen. And yes, T.J. Hockenson was good last year, the 5th most tight end snaps, top 10 in target rate, but he's taken as the 3rd tight end off the board, and last year he was only 10th at earning targets. Now it's going to be harder to earn targets with Addison there. So Jordan Addison is a great 8th round pick who projects closer to being like a 5th or a 6th round receiver. Now, although you don't want T.J. Hockenson at the tight end position, Darren Waller is one of the 10 best fantasy picks this season. He has a chance to be the number 1 overall tight end. And I know Travis Kelce exists. That's why I said there's a chance. Now, based on all the camp reports and the preseason usage we saw from him in week 2 of the preseason, he's the Giants' number 1 option. And once you start diving in here, it makes a lot of sense, because yeah, they have nice pieces. They're starting 3 wide receivers based on everything we've seen so far in the preseason who was being rested are Isaiah Hodgins, Paris Campbell, and Darius Slayton. These guys are fine NFL receivers. They're nice flex options maybe in fantasy leagues, but in terms of having a clear-cut number 1 option, none of these guys are that. So if Waller's the number 1 option, he'll likely earn 100 plus targets, which breaks down to at least 6 targets per game. And when Waller averages 6 targets per game, he earns 16.3 fantasy points, which would easily rank 2nd amongst tight ends last year. It'd actually be 22% more points than any other tight end scored not named Travis Kelce. Now, Waller is 30 years old. He'll be turning 31 this season. And just for some context, that's not super old for tight ends. Travis Kelce, for example, is coming off of being 34 years old. You might have not have heard Waller's name a lot last year, or maybe you were let down from him because he had a lot of injuries. In June, he had a hamstring injury, and then he re-injured this in October. So basically, the majority of the season he was dealing with a hamstring, was never 100%, but despite that, he was still a top 10 tight end in efficiency. And he was a top 10 efficiency tight end, and he was continuing to earn 6 targets per game, despite playing next to Devontae Adams, who earned 180 plus targets. And spoiler alert, there's no Devontae Adams in this Giants receiving core now. Now, the next player up is Jahan Dotson. He's one of the best wide receiver picks in fantasy this year. He might be the breakout wide receiver because he's done everything right in camp in this preseason. In week 2 of the preseason, he played 98% of the snaps with the starters, 41 of 42 snaps. And he dominated, operating as the wide receiver 1 ahead of Terry McLaurin, having 7 targets, catching 5 balls for 76 yards. McLaurin did leave this game later on when all the starters started to leave because he ended up getting injured. And this injury is serious. Don't let anybody play it off at all. You could see this is a long sentence from Adam Schefter, but the injury was turf toe. He's now, as you can see here, uncertain for the regular season opener. And honestly, there's a really long time that we could see McLaurin miss 2 to 4 weeks of the season. And that makes Terry McLaurin one of the worst picks in fantasy right now. He goes as the wide receiver 20 at the overall 51st pick. This is like round 4 or round 5 of fantasy drafts. That's way too early. Now, the good news for Jahan Dotson is he's probably going to operate as the wide receiver 1 to start the year. And his quarterback in the preseason has been great. He's completed 76% of his passes and leads all quarterbacks in passer rating this preseason. Now, Dotson only played in 9 games fully healthy last year, but in these games, he averaged 14 points, which would have finished top 20 amongst wide receivers. Now, despite that information, Dotson goes as the 38th receiver in draft. Maybe he's moving up a little bit in your drafts right now, but he'll still be taken outside the top 30. Now, the next player in our 10 best picks for this year is going to be be Joe Mixon, and let's start with this stat right here. The Bengals are 6-point favorites or better in more than half of their games this season. And this is important because in 13 career games as a 6-point favorite or better, Joe Mixon averages 20.3 fantasy points, and between his receptions and rushing attempts, over 20 touches per game. And he looks to pick right back up where he left off last year with the second best role in the NFL. And this year, he's actually going to have less competition because reliable backup running back Samaje Perine is gone. And Perine leaves behind a lot of opportunities. Between his carries and his targets, 146 opportunities, and more importantly, 51 running back targets. That was top 20 amongst running backs last year. Mixon already set a career high with 60 catches last year, and now there's 51 more running back targets available. Mixon has dodged every single thing that has come his way this offseason, and now he's ready to be the RB1 week 1. And if you don't know what he's dodged, the Bengals didn't draft or sign any key running backs. He took a pay cut to remain in Cincinnati, and he was found not guilty in his offseason menacing charge. So in round 3 and often round 4 of your fantasy draft, Mixon goes right around the 35th overall pick, so it's right in that buffer of round 3 or round 4. Mixon is one of the 10 best fantasy picks this year. And by the way, if you're finding this content helpful so far, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you get all the content I drop this year to schmack around your buddies in fantasy. And now we move back to the wide receiver position where we talk about Tyler Lockett, our next player on this list. And Tyler Lockett, look, this guy once again is a major value. He's finished as a top 24 wide receiver 5 years in a row and now goes after that this year. More specifically, he goes as the 66th overall player, which is around the 30th wide receiver off the board. Because despite being 31 years old, he was still top 5, a career best at beating man coverage, as you can see right here last year. And look, Lockett has virtually no injury history in terms of missing NFL games. Because yes, if you look 7 years ago in 2016, he fractured his fibula, but it was at the end of the year. He only missed 1 game because of that. After this, he's basically just been on the practice report a couple times. He's only missed 3 total games in his 8-year NFL career. And this is a calculated decision because maybe you've seen it. He often purposely falls down after the catch to avoid contact or goes out of bounds. So he's not your typical 31-year-old wide receiver. And now the Seahawks did take Jackson Smith-Njigba with the 20th overall pick, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, the first wide receiver off the board and valued by many as the best receiver in the draft. But JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, had to get wrist surgery, and he's going to miss some time. Probably won't play week 1. Pro Football Doc says he might not be back until week 6. A lot of people are saying maybe week 3 or 4. But the Seahawks have no incentive to rush him back. They just spent a lot of capital on him. Make sure he's healthy because you have Metcalf and Lockett to actually keep the offense afloat. And now I've heard in some places, oh, Tyler Lockett, he's more of the Russell Wilson guy. Metcalf's the Geno guy. Well, look at this. In 21 career games with Geno, he's averaged 14.2 points, which is more than he did in most of his career with Russell Wilson, just 12.5 points per game. So go grab Tyler Lockett and then this next late round running back. And that would be the best late round running back out there right now, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers, whose preseason usage was amazing. You can see my tweet right here. Jaylen Warren played every third down snap with the Steelers starters across all 3 preseason games and earned a total of 43% of the first team reps, really close to a 50-50 backfield with Najee. And it probably would have been a 50-50 backfield, but he had a 62-yard touchdown, which took even more potential snaps away from him. Now, Dwayne McFarland on Twitter basically rehashes a lot of this, but he puts it perfectly right here. This is shaping up like the old Zeke versus Pollard situation. Zeke's the guy that has the investment in him, with Najee being a first-round pick, and then Pollard's the better running back, more dynamic, and it can actually produce like a Warren. And believe it or not, this actually makes Najee Harris one of the worst picks in fantasy drafts because he goes in like the 2nd or 3rd round right now. Yeah, he still has that first-round draft capital from 2021, but it's year 3, and he hasn't been efficient yet, so that's going to start wearing off. Because last year, Jaylen Warren, as an undrafted rookie, averaged 5.6 yards per touch in this offense, 11th best in the NFL. Najee Harris was well down that list, averaging just 4 yards per touch. And again, this looks a lot like the Zeke and Pollard split, or even the Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon split of the past, but you don't have to pay those prices for Jaylen Warren. Because Warren goes as the 144th overall player off the board, right around the running back 50 in like rounds 13 or 14 of your drafts. Guys like Tony Pollard and Austin Eckler, when they were splitting their backfield, they were like 5th and 6th round picks. So get Warren, make sure to avoid Najee. Your buddies are probably just getting back into fantasy and think Najee's going to be great. They're probably saying to themselves, oh, he had 272 carries last year, he had 53 targets, he's going to see another 300 plus touches this year. A little do they know, he's probably closer to seeing 200 touches this year than 300. Now, as we continue through these 10 best picks, you also want this next asset, and that'll be the fantasy blueprint, because if you want to win your league, this is for you. You want to schmack around your buddies and take home a championship, get the fantasy blueprint, because it's going to have everything you need to do just that. Like our top 255 overall player rankings, you can see we just talked about Jaylen Warren. He is right now my 108th player. I'm 48 spots ahead of the market, meaning I think he should be taken in like the 8th or 9th round. Now, to get access to the blueprint, it's simple. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below and follow those 2 steps. And this is what those 2 steps look like on the website. But more importantly, if you see right here, you're going to get access for just $5 the entire season, not just your draft weeks 1 through 17. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund that $5. This is 100% risk-free. So if you want to join the thousands of people already using the blueprint for their drafts and their season this year? Well, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Now we head back to the 10 best picks for this year, and Dalton Kincaid's on here. And if you're just getting back into fantasy, you might say, who is this guy? Well, he was the first round pick for the Buffalo Bills. He's a tight end, but don't lump him into your average rookie tight end who doesn't produce year one. No, because this dude is going to be a wide receiver for the Bills. Look at this. The 4 wide receivers went in a row right before the Bills. The Bills were projected to take one of these 4 wide receivers. They all went right in a row, so they had to pivot and take the best pass catching tight end in the draft out of Utah, Dalton Kincaid. And if you don't believe me that'll be a wide receiver, despite all of the camp reports and what we've seen in the preseason, his own general manager this month said he will be. He said Kincaid is at his best when he's flexed out in that receiver role. And in the preseason, we got to see him flexed out wide and also in the slot as a wide receiver. Now in college, Kincaid was fantastic. He earned 34%, a college dominator, 34% of his team's offensive production, 94th percentile, top 6% of all time ever for a tight end. And that is better than Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews had in college. And what this broke down to last year was in his 12 games, he had 96 targets. That's 8 targets per game. That is wide receiver usage, people. And check this out. Across his first 26 preseason snaps, he pass blocked on 0 of these snaps, meaning he ran a route on every single passing play. Yeah, that's not a tight end, it's a receiver. The camp reports have said he's lined up in the slot a lot. We saw that in the preseason, and this is important because Josh Allen's slot wide receivers averaged 13 points per game, which would rank 3rd amongst tight ends last year. Now, it's worth touching on the Bills' 3rd preseason game, and this helpful tweet from Josh Nort's important because look at this. Every single snap, they're using a different formation. 11 personnel, 21 personnel, back to 11 personnel. Basically, they were just trying to try a lot of things here, so don't read too much into the snaps from this game. So let's move from one rookie into another at the running back position. And it'll be the Lions rookie Jahmyr Gibbs, who has the potential to definitely finish as a top 10 running back, but also a top 5 running back this season. Gibbs is going to join this Lions backfield that led the NFL in running back opportunities last year. And this allowed DeAndre Swift to finish 2nd in the NFL in yards per touch, averaging 6.3 yards per touch per game. And it's likely that Jahmyr Gibbs is a better player than the 2nd round pick DeAndre Swift when Gibbs was a top 12 overall pick. I mean, it's rare we get this type of draft capital out of running backs. We saw with Bijan Robinson being a top 10 pick, but Jahmyr Gibbs is right in that same category, going just a few picks later, 12th overall to Detroit. And what he's most known for is his pass catching skill set. You can see here his receptions in college, he averaged over 30 catches per year. If you have 20 catches in a season in college, that's great. He did it for 3 years, 20 plus, averaging 30 per year, had 44 last year. And now check this out. Just check out the target shares right here. 11%, 14%, and 13% of his team's targets he earned. DeAndre Swift never had one season like this in college. Jahmyr Gibbs did it all 3 years. This is elite usage. And a reminder, Swift finished as a top 15 running back last year in this offense, and Gibbs is going to be a better pass catcher and overall player. Now, the major knock on Gibbs is right here. He's only 199 pounds. He won't earn the red zone work, which is probable because you have David Montgomery signing there, and he's, 25 pounds bigger at 222 pounds. But this should be expected based on Gibbs' college usage. He never had over 151 carries in a season. But none of that matters because one of my favorite tweets this offseason is here from Dwayne McFarland. He said Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey as rookies didn't even see 30% of their team's carries. That's 7 carries per game, and they were still the running back 3 and the running back 9 overall. That's the type of upside we have here for Gibbs because of his pass catching usage. And another great tweet from Dwayne McFarland is look at all the running backs who have gone with a top 12 pick in the draft and what they did their rookie year. Saquon 2nd overall, Fournette 8th overall. You have Zeke, Todd Gurley, Trent Richardson all top 10 overall. The worst one was Christian McCaffrey 13th overall, where Gibbs in drafts right now goes after that. So yeah, in round 3 or even if he falls to round 4, Gibbs is a priority. And while we're here and I have you on this Detroit Lions team, I just gotta let you know, don't draft Jameson Williams. Yeah, he only goes in round 12, but he's suspended. He has a hamstring injury. His own coach said his hands aren't ever going to be an elite receiver's hands. And you might say, oh, it's just round 12. No, there's good options going here. Rashad Bateman, potentially the wide receiver 1 for the Ravens. Jaylen Warren, who we talked about earlier. Even guys like Kenneth Gainwell, Adam Thielen, who saw a bunch of targets from Bryce Young in the preseason. I don't want Jameson Williams, and you shouldn't either. So we get back to our best picks this year, and we go to a wide receiver. And it is Diontae Johnson, who literally by the day is becoming a better option in fantasy drafts. And you might ask, why is it happening by the day? Well, the fella has always been a great pick this offseason, whether you get him in the 5th or 7th round of drafts. But with the recent injury news to guys like Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Diontae Johnson looks even more secure. And then you look at the guys at other positions who go around him, and you're seeing guys like A.J. Dillon. You scroll a little bit more, you can find Brian Robinson. I just don't want these running backs. Another option would be Isaiah Pacheco. No, I'd rather have Diontae. Diontae averaged 8.6 targets per game last year, top 10 in the NFL. And in previous seasons before last year, when Diontae averaged over 8 targets per game across 26 games in his career where he saw that metric, 8 targets per game, he had 19 fantasy points per game. Then last year, he just averaged 10.6 fantasy points per game. Why was this? Well, 2 reasons. He saw the lowest yards after the catch of his career, and he scored 0 touchdowns on 147 targets. And that's 0 touchdowns on 147 targets yards is an NFL record. It's not going to happen again. I mean, we have a very recent example of this touchdown regression happening for a wide receiver in Jacoby Myers. In 2021, Myers had just 2 touchdowns on 126 targets. People were saying, oh, he can't score touchdowns. Well, the next year he scores 6 touchdowns. Now, Deontay Johnson, based on his usage, was expected to score at least 7 touchdowns last year. And if he would have scored these 7 touchdowns, he would have actually finished as the 9th overall wide receiver in fantasy based on his expected usage, which was ahead of guys like Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase, players who go well ahead of him this year. And it is worth mentioning that his quarterback, Kenny Pickett, has been the #1 graded quarterback by Pro Football Focus this preseason. Back to the running backs we go with our next best pick for fantasy this year, and it's James Cook, the running back for the Bills, who is a breakout running back candidate. Cook played over 80% of the snaps in his first 2 preseason games with the starters for the Bills. Now, last year, the leader in snaps in the NFL was Alvin Kamara, and he played 80% of the snaps. So this probably isn't likely to continue this high of snap usage for James Cook, and that's what we saw in the 3rd preseason game. Because in this 3rd preseason game, Damian Harris made his debut, and Harris played 4 of the 13 snaps. That's 30% of the snaps with the starters, but James Cook still played 9 of 13, got the first 9 snaps of the game, 70% of the snaps. Now, Harris did see all 4 red zone snaps and got a goal line touchdown in this game, but this should be expected. A lot of people are like, oh, Cook won't see the red zone work. Well, yeah, obviously. Because like Jahmyr Gibbs we talked about earlier, Cook is smaller. He's just 199 pounds, and Damian Harris in this backfield would be the David Montgomery in this situation at 220 pounds. But we've already been talking about this on this channel, and we already knew all this, but here's the good news. James Cook still saw 70% of the snaps in that game. Only 6 running backs averaged 70% snaps last year, and all 6 of those guys were top 15 running backs. But this year, right now in drafts, Cook goes around like the 30th running back. And let me remind you, he led the NFL in breakaway run rate last year of 15 plus yards. And now imagine when he starts to see more touches. He's that explosive of a player. And Cook appears to be the running back 1 in Buffalo. Buffalo has a top 10 offense, and this is important because running backs on top 10 offenses average a top 15 fantasy finish. So go grab Cook. And now we haven't talked about any quarterbacks, and there's a reason for this. There's no like middle round Jalen Hurts this year. But if I had to choose a quarterback range to target, I want to get my quarterback in like round 3 of fantasy drafts. If Josh Allen falls there, oftentimes Jalen Hurts and even Lamar Jackson sometimes falls to round 4. That's where I want to go. These elite mobile upside quarterbacks. Because the past 2 to 3 seasons, these mobile quarterbacks produce over 30% more points than any other QB. Now, if for some reason I miss out on these guys, I like this tier right here. Some more mobile types of quarterbacks, and Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson, even Geno Smith, which you can get around 8 to 12, and even maybe a Deshaun Watson falls to like round 9 for you. But in your home leagues where you can dominate your friends in the later round with all the values that'll be available and you can identify, I want you to get one of those elite quarterbacks. Now, these are the 10 best picks for 2023 fantasy football. But if you want to see the #1 draft strategy overall, well, check out this video right here. And if you made it to the end, hit the subscribe button. It definitely helps me out and helps the channel grow, but it'll help you see my future videos that come out so you can smack around your buddies in fantasy this season.